failing fast. It's
Yes.
in some areas it's a bit of a buzzword, but it's something that you encourage.
Yes, I love that we're being characterised as a school that's embracing failing, but actually we are. We want to fail successfully.
You're listening to Around the School Table, hosted by me, Steve Davis, and proudly powered by Xuno Suite. We'll be bringing together the many voices shaping primary and secondary education across Australia, from principals and teachers to education thought leaders and system innovators. Whether you're in the classroom, the staff room, or the boardroom, this is your podcast to be informed, inspired, and connected. Today on Around the School Table, we're venturing to a school that could easily be mistaken for the subject of an Arthur Boyd landscape. It's nestled in rolling Victorian hills, standing as stubbornly authentic as the artist's own brushstrokes. Harkaway Primary School is about to celebrate its 150th birthday, a rare institution that still operates without mains water while quietly preparing students for a world of unprecedented changes and challenges. At its helm is Principal Leigh Johnson, whose manifesto for education isn't grounded in political revolution, but something equally powerful: child-centred disaster reduction and resilience. It's a blueprint that draws families to bypass closer options, seeking something that can't be captured in standardised testing or glossy brochures. So with that setup, let's unpack how this tiny school of just 100 students is creating a masterpiece of education that's both firmly grounded in its historic roots and boldly reaching toward horizons that we're only beginning to imagine. Leigh Johnson, welcome to Around the School Table.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for the introduction. Very bold, colourful strokes there of the brush.
Yes, look, I might have borrowed from an artist, but in fact, let's talk about him firstly, because Harkaway turns 150 years old next year, the time of recording. It was founded in 1876. Now, I hope this doesn't offend you, but it's not well known nationally, your school. But listeners will recall artist Arthur Boyd. He lived down the road. So what's it like leading a school with that kind of legacy, especially one that's operating without mains water, heaven forbid?
Well, in actual fact, we've actually just renamed one of our central spaces here, the Grange, which was actually the name of the house where his uncle lived, and who are artists, of course, in their own right, and sculptors and the rest of it. And he painted murals on the walls there, which sadly the house got destroyed to make dig up things from the ground. And but they were able to save a few of his murals. So there's Jessie Trail as well, another famous artist who her studio's just around the corner here as well. So it's incredibly important for us to be grounded. So not only do we have that kind of heritage here, the building itself is 150 years old. We've got trees here that predate white settlement. And then yesterday, I had a busload of visitors who had travelled literally thousands and thousands of kilometres from China. A heap of teachers and principals there. And out of the 3,000 odd schools in Victoria, they've only visited 3. And I asked them, why on earth have you come all this way to visit this tiny little school who no one knows we're here anyway, and we're not unhappy about that. How did you happen to be here? It was a privilege for us to show off, the kind of learning that happens and the kids that are here. And they just said, we were recommended to come and visit you.
So that means, again, the spotlight and the stories get shared around the world. They're little ripples. What a great lesson for your kids to understand.
It is extraordinary that any one of us can make a difference in our world.
Yes, and I'm actually taking some heart because my 16-year-old daughter just painted a mural on one of the walls in our house, which I thought was rather bold as parents to allow her to do that, but it seems there's precedent.
Indeed, a high-quality precedent too, particularly if you go around and look at some of them on the walls in the city there in Fitzroy North and some of those incredible inspirational places.
Yes. Now, Leigh, you've had a fascinating journey. You were a science teacher in Emerald. Now you're principal at Harkaway. What drew you to this small school?
I literally used to live a few houses down, and when I was studying to become a teacher, I thought, I love the look of that place. I would love to teach there one day, which just goes to show, be careful what you wish for. And now I actually have that honour. But one of the reasons why I'm here and continue to serve this community is because it's meaningfully relational. You don't know if that makes sense, but like everyone's known and you know each other. You get to be a part of people's community. You know their pet dogs, or if some dogs running around the front yard. Well, we know who that owner is, and we know that the next door neighbour, and we can just deal with that in the way. Or all of those things. Or if someone's going through some hardship, we're there to be able to support them. There's no one invisible, and that's what makes education incredibly important, is that everyone is seen and they know that they are seen.
Isn't it also interesting that, I think Arthur Boyd would like this, it was the aesthetics of the building that planted a seed in your mind, and you've responded to that?
The number of people who say, I'll ask them, well, how do you even know we're here, and why did you enroll? And a lot of people say, I came here to vote and I fell in love with the place. And I said, my child is coming to this school. And it's exactly, the reason for many people. The aesthetic of the place is extraordinary. Just watching our international visitors again yesterday with the sulphur-crested cockatoos, and I've got a couple of tawny frogmouths sitting in the driveway there, and the sugar gliders and all of that, and then the view down to Western Port and Port Phillip. It is an extraordinary place. We understand we're in this little bubble of happiness. At the same time, that gives us a responsibility to export that happiness, I guess, become the kinds of people that can make a difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, as you were talking about life in that town, it took me back to a novel, I think it was called The Carpathians, in which the author mentioned that life in this little town was like every other little town, with its factions, frictions, fictions, and fractions.
That's a brilliant quote.
You actually mentioned in a previous chat that many parents have to drive past other schools to get to Harkaway. What's the attraction?
Great question. I wish I knew. It's not that they have to. They choose to drive past other schools. And so every parent that comes to have a look at our school, I say, look, we are incredibly blessed by the number of high-quality schools everywhere. Every school in this part of the state, well, I would say every Victorian state school there is an incredible place for learning to happen for your child, an incredible choice. And we here have a real concentration of, incredibly high-quality schools. So whatever the choice is, it's going to be a good choice. So I say to parents, it has to be a good fit for you. That parent intuition, because there's so much parent guilt at the moment, but it's actually your intuition as a parent is what you need to trust, and you go with that. And then we go on to explain what it is that makes us who we are. And then parents have that freedom to make that choice.
It's so good, isn't it, when you feel great in being part of a school community and taking kids there. I think it's a rare thing. It's possibly not common, and it's a beautiful thing to have when it's available.
It is an extraordinary privilege just to have the confidence to serve our community, our families, and more than that, just to be able to share our stories. I get to show off about what our kids are doing every single day I do a tour, and that's a privilege.
In the introduction, I mentioned your manifesto, and I must say, when I think manifesto, I'm thinking Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto, more recently, Luigi Mangione, his manifesto over in New York. But, heavy, they're politically inspired. But you have, Harkaway Primary School has its own manifesto. It centres around your child-centred disaster reduction. Can you talk to it for me?
I would be honoured. Thank you for the opportunity. There is another manifesto in England just after the floods. So these experts in child-centred disaster risk reduction got together and they created a manifesto with the kids there. I didn't know about that at this time. But here in Harkaway, we are working with an incredible sociocultural psychologist, Dr. Bryony Towers, this just incredibly wonderful, tuned in, switched on, educator in her own context as a child-centred disaster risk reduction researcher who stepped into the space and said, right, how are we going to do something that's incredibly meaningful? If you think about the hazards that our kids are facing over their lifetimes, as well as our own, they're huge. We don't know what the answers are. So we have to set our kids up to be able to learn how to learn to find those answers. And if that's what we're here for, then we need a framework within which to do that. A lot of things come to schools. So how do we know how to say yes to something? How do we know how to say no to something else? What happened with these kids? They had literally been lecturing as authentic guest lecturers at our MIT to a master's degree course there with Dr. Briney, as it was her course. And they were like experts on being kids and learning about disaster risk reduction. And they were honoured and treated with the dignity that you'd expect a guest lecturer to have. And so they sat down after that. Dr. Briney pulled together all the different elements of the research that they had been doing as co-researchers and said, right, how do we make this so that we can carry it forward? How do we make this a thing? And between them, over the course of what they call their lunch meeting, they came up with these 4 points in the manifesto. And since then, it has just been the most extraordinary tool to work out, well, how do I work out what's important or not? So I can give you, rattle off the top 4 things. I mean, there's a whole lot underneath it, of course, but the top 4 things are really, really straightforward. And that is, we want to know about this stuff, bushfire risk. Because there's so many of us these days, we're like, oh, we're not sure if we should involve the children. Is it going to, like, eco-anxiety and the anxiety around, harm and hazard and vulnerability? We understand that. But actually, we know from the little bit of research that's out there, involve the kids, let them learn about this when it's age appropriate. They will not feel as anxious. In fact, they'll feel empowered to do something about it. And then their families are going to be leaning on them because they're now the experts. They're not just some rascally kid. They have learned this stuff. They've involved their parents. They've involved connecting with experts. And now they're perceived as experts in their own families and cultures and communities. Incredibly important. Mm-hmm. So they said, look, we want to learn about this stuff.
Yep.
The second thing, you might remember as a kid yourself, you go to school and you do the old black line master homework thing. Oh, we're going to meet at the letterbox if there's a fire, or stop, drop and roll, or put your back of your hand on the door. Like the stuff that we used to teach around this, the bits that stick don't help.
One of my colleagues I work with, he's got something stuck in his claw about we used to be taught stranger danger. And the research actually tells us that often strangers can be very helpful. Sometimes it's someone really close to you where there's a threat. So a lot of the things we just took on board in the olden days, there's more nuance to them. This is fascinating. I interrupted you. Please keep rolling on.
Oh, no. Can I say incredibly worthy interruption, though? The whole thing's about child safety, isn't it? That's exactly what we're talking about. Seeing kids in their context and empowering them to be safe. And what you've just said then is incredibly important about understanding the nature of risk. And then as schools, how do we teach kids to identify who it is you go and talk to so that you can talk to someone about anything or a group of people about any of the things. Yeah. So, thanks for bringing that up. The second thing was, though, we've done all this stuff, the myths, those zombie myths that refuse to go away. So how do we address those zombie myths? And the kids have said, we want to learn about stuff that's interesting to us. So if I'm teaching kids about bushfire safety, or bushfire risk reduction, like some kids are massively interested in how do I look after my pets? Like, I want to go back and save my fish from the fish bowl, or how do I deal with the horses in the back paddock, or my next door neighbours. Other kids are really interested in grandma, like what's Granda going to do? How are we going to let her know about that? She might be a few houses. Other kids want to know about what to pack. Like, do I have a go box ready to go? Other kids want to know about possums and what do we do after a fire and how do we help the local wildlife? Other kids want to know about, well, where are we going to go if we're going to go after? Other kids do not even know if their house is located on a bushfire at risk area, if there's a bushfire, say, overlay on their property. So there's all these incredible lines of inquiry that kids can be, pursuing if we let them. But we don't. We say, no, here's your black line master, take this home and fill it out for your homework and stick it on the fridge and come back and tell us what it was.
What an active childhood that is, as opposed to the passive childhood of, getting fed, doing a couple of chores and expecting everything to be thought out for you. This is revolutionary.
It ought not to be. It ought not to be.
Getting the balance right about when you're ready to take this responsibility, but that age-appropriate line, I think it keeps moving. Our kids are learning more about more earlier, and they have an appetite, and I suppose it's getting that balance right. We want to give them their childhood, but that doesn't mean cotton wool, does it?
Absolutely. In fact, it really is about, we're an IB school here, so one of our learner profile attributes is like being a risk taker. how do we, and as well as being balanced, so how do we curate this space so that they can be taking risks in an appropriate way? So the things we talk about with 11 and 12-year-olds about bushfire risk, we're not going to be talking about that with grade 3 and 4 children or in prep 1 and 2 children. Having said that, there are things that we can talk about to them. So who's an expert on talking to children? Other children. So we can get them to do that. And as a source of self-efficacy for children, we know that when they see someone just like them, they're much more likely to listen to it and pay attention, and that learning will stick. So that's what we're really interested in. So that's absolutely, critically important. Let's respect kids enough to find out what they're interested in. Let's learn the learners and then curate our practices around that. What you point to there about action, this is actually action-based learning, or if you think about John Dewey and the aesthetics of learning and actually taking action with your learning. Our little pithy statement here is nothing is taught until something is learned, and nothing is learned till you've done something with it. So that's to me, it's like just a practical, pragmatic kind of approach.
Yeah.
That's
Now, that's the first 2 of the manifesto. There's 2 more to go, aren't there?
Indeed, indeed. Interestingly, I have no problem talking for ages, but that's not good for learning. We have this thing like the teacher-talk ratio. Like, actually, the more balance you've got between children talking and teachers talking, the better the quality of learning. And so the third point kind of reflects this, which is, teachers, we love you, but get out of the way. We want to talk to experts. So Dr. Briney, for example, she's one of only 5 experts on the planet in this child-centred disaster risk reduction space. There are more on the way. There's a few more in Indonesia. But that doesn't mean that there's only those 5 people for kids to talk to. We were connecting with doctors and researchers and veterinarians, CSIRO and CFA and DEPI and, Melbourne Water. Like, there are so many experts. I had one child who would sit in the corner with his laptop and type away, and I had no kind of idea what he was doing. I'd go and try and peer over and see what he was up to, and he'd, shuffle away. Until eventually we get this phone call. And it was from a doctor, a professor in Queensland, I think university it was. And he'd sent her this email, and everything was in the subject line instead of in the body. And she was really annoyed at that. And at the same time, he was really interested in how do we support people with disabilities when they're being evacuated? Because the CFA truck's going to roll up. They have to get up into the back of the CFA truck, into the bus stop, whatever they call it up there. And if you're in a wheelchair, how is that going to happen? And then how are you going to have your wheelchair with you? And it's like the incredible other-centeredness that was present in this child's thinking was extraordinary. And then the idea that we reach out to a professional, that he found a professional and acted on that, once again, he's learned how to learn, So our job as teachers is to make ourselves redundant. And that's one expression of that.
We've got the 4th one now. What's the 4th one in this manifesto?
The 4th one is the most important one. It's the most significant one, and that is we want to teach other kids. So there's this whole history that Aaron Wood started this with his dad called Kids Teaching Kids. And what an incredible educator his dad was up in Mildura there. And they came from a sustainability perspective. I mean, Aaron obviously went on to become the Deputy Mayor of Melbourne. But his legacy, after 20 or 25 years of running these kids teaching kids events, was that we just bring a heap of kids together. We would help them teach each other around sustainability and let them go for it. For example, Melbourne Uni, we did it like MCG, Melbourne Uni, all these big signature event places, as well as groups of local schools coming together. But what it did, it said to children, you're worth listening to. Your ideas are important. And we're going to get all these signature events in our culture, T-shirts or, what do the Americans call it, swag, and give you these things to show you that you're worth listening to. And then these kids hear from each other and they go off and do it. So then, incredible, isn't it? Yeah. And then they keep doing it. And so instead of having to start from scratch every single year with every single group of kids, we've got a structure in place that leads to a culture where people want to go and share and learn from each other, and then they're building off what others have already learned.
Good morning.
Selamat pagi.
早安
Suprahat.
Kalimera
Buongiorno.
Magandang umaga.
좋은 아침이에요
Want to make sure every parent feels connected and informed, no matter what language they speak? Communication just got easier. With Xuno's multi-language feature, you can now connect with parents in over 130 languages. Automatically translated, instantly understood. Whether it's reminders, updates, or celebrations. Families receive your message in their preferred language, with no extra steps from you, no confusion, just clear communication. Every time. Try it today to build stronger school-to-home partnerships, inclusive, effortless, and effective.
I'm getting a strong sense that around the school table needs to be made available to everyone, because if you absorb the state of the world from mass media, it is rather bleak. And this is, through you, yet another story from a community where there are proactive things at work in which we are seizing agency and not just passively floating down the river of life. It's so incredible that this survives despite the narrative we get fed in mainstream, which leads me to something I think this is called the Go Box. You mentioned it just before. I want to come back to that because it's obviously important for people who live near bushfires or areas that could, suddenly experience a disaster, which is just about everywhere these days.
Look at New South Wales and the flooding happening up there.
Exactly. So for some of us who have lived a more sheltered life in the big smoke, what is a Go Box?
A Go Box is a really practical way of preparing for the bushfire season. And some kids identify that. In fact, the Red Cross have a program where they come into schools and they talk about using a pillowcase to collect all the things that are important to you. So as you're preparing to have to leave in a day of, say, catastrophic fire danger rating, and you have to evacuate or leave that area, which is at high risk, then you just grab your bag. It's already full of everything you want, and off you go. So I lived in Emerald. My kids were born up there, taught up there, love Emerald. Big shout out to everyone in Emerald listening. What we would have, our box would be at my mum and dad's place in Croydon, and that's where it would stay for summer. All our photographs, passports, anything that was important. Our Go Box would already be at mum and dad's. Other times, there might be already just live in the car. It's in the boot of the car, and if we have to jump in and go, then we're not thinking about what to take. So just a few weeks ago in Montrose, they had a huge bushfire happen quite out of the blue, completely unanticipated, and something that is incredibly unexpected. So, you don't know when you're going to be at risk or be vulnerable to the hazard that's happening. And so being mindful of that beforehand, it means you're not going to be as anxious. You're not going to be running back to pick up that fish in the fish bowl. You're not going to be looking for your favourite doll or teddy. It's already sitting there in its Go Box. Some people keep it by the front door, and something like other people have, they call it the summer box or the fire box, whatever it is. You've got an animal carrier right there with you, so that if you need to get the cat, you're not looking for somewhere to try and grab the cat and throw it in the back of the car and get everything scratched up. It's just that forward thinking. We can give that to children, because I think what I'm hearing you say, Steve, is that children are trustworthy. We can, in this day and age, we can actually trust children with a whole lot more than we used to.
And especially when they've got more information at their fingers, which is what this process is about. Of course they can. Yes.
Information with action.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. Now, something from my daily world, moving with businesses, etc., failing fast. It's in some areas it's a bit of a buzzword, but it's something that you encourage, and I believe there's a particular day in your history that brings this lesson to the surface.
Yes, I love that we're being characterised as a school that's embracing failing, but actually we are. We want to fail successfully. So I'm an education nerd. I'm in research. It's extraordinary. The world we live in right now, from an education research perspective, is gold. It's the best in all of history. Really strong contentions and different postures that schools can pick up in what schools are for in the first place, and all that sort of stuff. In Victoria over here, we have what's called the framework for improvement. So the FISO student outcome. So half of it's about wellbeing and half of it's about learning. So from a wellbeing perspective, we're really keen to understand, well, how do we give kids an opportunity to be resilient? And a big part of that, particularly post-COVID, is just normalising failure, like attempting something and not getting it. So we've picked up two things from Finland, of course, which is where we all go to steal good education practices.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind physically going there one day and finding out firsthand. But anyway, we've picked up one thing called Huff and Puff, which is they give their kids, time every hour, like 15 minutes or something like that, every hour to themselves. So we've got a pretty tight schedule. We give them 10 minutes, and we've taken that off their lunchtimes. But across the day, we give them 10 minutes. Go and run around, stick your hands in the air like you just don't care. Get a drink of water, chat with your friends. Doesn't matter, eat something. It's your 10 minutes. So they're moving their bodies and they're connecting with each other, and they come back, ready for learning. Brains that are calm and ready for learning because they've been up and about. The second thing, which is what you've asked about, that we've stolen from Finland, is on October the 13th, which is very convenient because October the 13th is also the International Day for child-centred disaster risk reduction. But in Finland, it's the national day for celebrating failure. So, Steve, if you were to rock up at my front door on October the 13th or the nearest Friday, I'd be saying, what's your favourite fail story? Give us your epic fail story. And that's what we do. We all share and prepare a narrative, an epic fail story, because we want to normalise, give it a crack, have a go at it, and fail. And when you have academics that come in and answer that question, or say parents or whoever it is, there's always got to be, the moral of the story was I failed, but this is what I learned. And I go, no, I just want to hear the fail story. That's it. I tried and I failed.
So me hoisting up my pants and showing odd socks is not quite cutting the mustard, is it?
that would be pretty normal, actually. We call those happy socks.
Okay. Harkaway, the students there, they're doing water testing as part of river detectives, and they're learning about local ecosystems as they do this. I'm sensing the previous science teacher in you has your hand in this. How do they connect this science they're doing to the real world action?
We want kids to take action with their learning. So a citizen science project is kind of a logical thing to do with them, and that is Melbourne Water run a program called River Detectives. And what that means is we hop down to our local creek, the Cardinia Creek, and we literally get the NTU, the water quality testing thing, and it's got a great big long scientific name which escapes me at the moment. Yep. And the kids have to learn how to use that. They've got to learn how to tell the temperature of the water. They've got to learn how to, assess the habitat on both sides of the banks of the river. They've got to learn how to report that on a database so that the scientists who are analysing that data have access to it. So we don't want children learning about being scientists. We want them being scientists. We don't want children to learn about writing. We want them being writers. So this is like that enacted learning thing all over again. We're particularly looking at a peated part of the river where up until the 1983 Ash Wednesday bushfires, there was a local platypus population that became extinct to that area after those fires. And what we're seeing now is evidence firsthand from down the creek, but certainly there's hopeful evidence there that the conditions are right for platypus to be back in that exact space again. And our kids get really excited about that. Once again, they can see what they're doing is making a difference in the world.
I want to up the ante even further because you are known as talking about helping kids belong to something bigger than themselves. And to that end, you've actually connected with universities like RMIT and Deakin and also some overseas, like in Indonesia. What have been some of the outcomes of this outreach?
So one of the privileges of being a small school is that we get to be agile. We get to be right on the front foot about what's happening in the world. So, and I see that as a responsibility that we have that. We've got such incredibly strong relationships. People are choosing to be here with their children. So we use that to really step into that educational space around what's best practice. In terms of the Indonesian partnership, we developed this game with Kineski, it's called Kineski, and with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade funded the Kineski, which is a body that they use to develop relationships between Australia and Indonesia. And so that involved connecting with all these experts and universities to design a climate change education game. And in Indonesia, they were working with local schools around, climate change education, but let's gamify that. Let's make it, so you have to learn these skills around preparing for drought or preparing for a volcanic eruption and all that. And I thought, well, let's test that with the Australian kids as well. So they did an English language version of it. And we've practiced it over here and taken to other schools. And then the research team came over, and then we're Zooming with kids in Indonesia. Kupang is the place I'm thinking of. And then, different schools all the way up, including kids doing life with disabilities over there in Indonesia as well. And when the final game was released, you see all these brands on the side of who contributed to this game. And they're tacked on the very end was a little logo, Harkaway Primary School. So the kids got to see themselves as being co-equal researchers, partners in the development of something that's making a difference in the world.
If there is one lesson from Harkaway's approach to education that you think every school could adopt, what would it be?
No. Well, certainly I wouldn't be mandating anything. Every school could adopt is learn your learners. And then take action with what you've learned. I guess that's it. I haven't thought about that, but for me, it's like a good school, is a school that affords learner agency. And so learn your learners and take action with what you've learned.
That's beautiful. I see a range of fortune cookies coming with those sorts of pithy sayings inside.
Well, thank you, I think.
Leigh Johnson, thank you very much for sitting down around the school table.
It's been an absolute privilege, enjoyed every moment.